In the southern grasslands of Alberta, where the prairie suddenly drops away into a hidden river valley, there are cliffs of pale sandstone, carved by wind and water into hundreds of towering, twisted shapes, hoodoos, standing silent in rows that stretch for kilometers in every direction. Cut into the rock face of those cliffs are thousands of images. Warriors on horseback, spirit beings, battle scenes, handprints, animals that don't quite look like anything alive today. Some of these carvings have been here for roughly 3,000 years. Others were added within living memory, generations after most of the rock art traditions on this continent had already gone quiet. In the 1920s, elders who had grown up near this valley told an American writer passing through something simple and direct about the place. This is where ghosts live and people do not. It's the kind of line that sticks with you, the sort of thing that could anchor an entire campfire legend on its own, and for decades, it did exactly that. For decades, outside visitors treated that statement and this entire valley as an unsolved riddle, an eerie gallery of carvings nobody could fully explain, tucked into a landscape that felt wrong to walk through even before you knew its reputation. It took nearly a century and a genuine partnership between archaeologists and the descendants of the people who actually made this place to understand what was really being said here and why. This is writing on stone. The Blackfoot call it Áísínai'pi, and what it actually means may be more remarkable than any ghost story. If you're new here, this channel covers ancient North American history and the landmarks hiding some of the continent's most remarkable, least-known stories. Like and subscribe now and let me know in the comments if you'd ever heard of writing on stone before today. Writing on Stone sits in the Milk River Valley in southern Alberta, close enough to the Montana border that you can see the Sweetgrass Hills rising on the horizon to the south. Hills the Blackfoot know as petroglyph, said in oral tradition to be the resting place of a culture hero who freed the bison and made the world safe for people. The Milk River itself, named by explorers Lewis and Clark, who thought its clouded water looked like tea mixed with milk, cuts through the surrounding grassland here, and over millions of years, that cutting action has carved an elaborate network of sheer sandstone cliffs and coulees into the landscape, exposing pale rock walls that rise abruptly out of otherwise flat prairie without warning. Scattered across this valley are the hoodoos, tall, narrow columns of sandstone left standing after softer surrounding rock eroded away around them, some capped with a harder layer of caprock that has protected the column beneath it, while everything around it slowly wore down to nothing over thousands of years. Seen from a distance, especially at dawn or dusk, entire hillsides of hoodoos can look almost like a crowd of silent figures standing motionless in the grass, an effect early visitors to the valley remarked on repeatedly, and one that goes a long way toward explaining why this specific stretch of prairie developed such a distinct, unsettling reputation among outsiders long before anyone had properly studied what was carved into it. Into the sandstone faces of these cliffs, generations of indigenous artists carved and painted an enormous continuous record of their world. Researchers estimate the earliest confirmed human activity at the site dates back roughly 3,000 years, based on artifacts recovered from ancient campsites buried at the bottom of the surrounding coulees, and the tradition of adding new rock art here continued in an unbroken line all the way into the early 20th century. A documented span of use longer than most written civilizations have existed anywhere on Earth. Taken together, this makes Writing on Stone home to the largest concentration of indigenous rock art anywhere on the North American Great Plains. More than 50 distinct petroglyph panels, and by some counts, well over 100 individual rock art sites scattered across the park, containing thousands of separate images in total. Before metal tools existed, the carvings, known as petroglyphs, were made using antler, or bone, worked directly into the relatively soft sandstone one careful stroke at a time. Alongside them are pictographs, painted images made using red ochre, a pigment created by mixing crushed iron ore with water or rendered bison fat, producing the deep reds, oranges, and yellows still faintly visible on some panels today. While most of this art is attributed to the Áísínai'pi, the Blackfoot nation, whose traditional territory this valley sits within, researchers believe other groups passing through the region over the centuries, including Cree, Gros Ventre, Assiniboine, Crow, Kootenai, and Shoshone travelers, may have added images of their own as well, making the site a kind of shared, layered record rather than the work of a single, isolated group. The images themselves range from simple, almost abstract markings to enormously detailed, complex narrative scenes, and the single most striking example of the latter is a panel known today as the battle scene. Accessible along a short trail near the park's public road, and now protected behind a fence to guard it from vandalism, the battle scene is the most extensive and complex single composition anywhere at the site. It contains over 250 individual figures, 115 warriors, 17 horses, some shown pulling travois, and 44 separate firearms depicted among the combatants. Researchers believe it documents a real and specific historical event, a battle fought in 1866 between Blackfoot warriors and a coalition of Crow, Gros Ventre, and Plains Cree fighters near the Milk River. It isn't a myth or a folktale carved in stone. It's closer to a battlefield report, a detailed, on-the-ground record of a real conflict, preserved by the people who were actually there, down to specific weapon counts and the presence of horse-drawn equipment. Elsewhere across the site, the carvings shift from historical record to something more overtly spiritual. Figures interpreted as thunderbirds and shaman-like spirit beings appear throughout the cliffs, alongside handprints, animal figures, and abstract geometric marks whose specific meaning isn't always agreed upon, even among researchers who have studied the site for decades. According to Blackfoot tradition, young warriors would travel to this specific valley to undertake vision quests, days spent fasting and praying alone at the site, and many of the images are understood to record the visions and dreams these young men experienced during that isolation, carved into the rock as a kind of permanent testimony to what they had seen and been told. Some of the carvings are far more recent than most visitors assume, and the site's timeline of use runs right up to the edge of living memory. One image, of a horse-drawn wagon, was long mistaken by casual observers for modern graffiti, an unwanted addition rather than a genuine part of the site's tradition. Research eventually established that it was actually carved in the 1920s by a settler who had traveled to the site together with a Blackfoot elder specifically in order to add to the valley's long visual record, a collaborative act that mirrors, on a small scale, the much larger partnership that would eventually secure the site's UNESCO recognition decades later. Around the same period, in September 1924, two Piikani elders, Bird Rattle and Split Ears, journeyed to Áísínai'pi together with American travel companions, a documented visit that stands as one of the clearer records of Blackfoot elders returning to the site specifically to engage with its history during the early 20th century, at a time when access to and open practice of Indigenous ceremony across the plains had been severely restricted by government policy. It's a reminder that this wasn't a tradition that stopped at some fixed point in the ancient past. People were still actively adding to writing on stone and still actively returning to it within living memory of people alive today. And the record itself even includes, according to Parks Canada's own account, depictions of the very first automobiles to pass through the region, carved alongside images of horses and rifles from an earlier era of change. If you're wondering what actually explains a place elders once described as somewhere ghosts live and people do not, stay with me and subscribe now if you want to see where this goes, because the real answer took archaeologists the better part of 2 decades, working directly alongside Blackfoot knowledge holders to properly understand. For much of the 20th century, writing on stone was treated by outside visitors and even some early researchers as a genuine puzzle, an atmospheric, unsettling place whose meaning was assumed to be largely lost or at best only partially recoverable through archaeology alone, working from the outside in. The 1920s account passed down through American writer Roland Wilkham, describing the valley in the words of local elders as "somewhere ghosts live and people do not," captures exactly that outside perception. A landscape that felt haunted, paired with a body of rock art that felt like a code nobody outside the community that made it could fully read or properly interpret. What changed that understanding wasn't a single discovery, a breakthrough excavation, or a lucky find. It was a long, deliberate process of bringing Blackfoot knowledge directly into the research itself, rather than continuing to treat the rock art purely as an archaeological artifact to be interpreted from the outside, using only the tools and assumptions of Western academic archaeology. Archaeologist Jack Brink, curator emeritus at the Royal Alberta Museum, was one of the key researchers involved in this shift, and he helped guide the nomination team through the 15-year process that eventually led to Writing on Stone's UNESCO World Heritage designation in 2019. That process, by design, required reconciling how archaeologists typically date and classify a site like this with how the Blackfoot themselves understand their own relationship to it, two frameworks that don't always align neatly and that don't necessarily need to in order for both to hold genuine value. Blackfoot elder Martin Heavyhead of the Kainai Nation worked for more than 20 years specifically to have Áísínai'pi's cultural significance formally recognized on the world stage, and his own explanation of the site's name reframes much of what outside visitors had gotten wrong for decades. The direct English translation, Heavyhead has explained, it is written, can be misleading because it implies something fixed, a finished document, closed and completed, like a religious text sealed at the moment of its writing. He prefers a different reading of the Blackfoot name entirely, a place where things are being written, an ongoing, living archive rather than a sealed record of a vanished past. That distinction matters enormously to how the whole site should actually be understood. The valley was never meant to be a mystery waiting patiently to be solved once and for all. It was, and in the Blackfoot understanding still is, an active spiritual landscape, one that continued accumulating new meaning for as long as people kept visiting it, right up through carvings added in the 1920s and ceremonial use that continues at the site today, in the present tense, not the past. That reframing also puts the ghosts quote in a very different light than outside visitors originally took it. In Blackfoot tradition, the cliffs and hoodoos of Áísínai'pi are understood to be home to sacred beings, spiritual presences that inhabit this specific landscape and that young warriors sought guidance from during their vision quests. It's worth considering that the 1920s account, filtered through a visiting American writer working second-hand from what elders told him, may simply have landed on ghosts as the closest available English word for a concept that didn't map cleanly onto it, though that specific reasoning isn't something any source confirms directly. What the Blackfoot framework itself actually describes is something closer to an ongoing, active relationship between this land and the spirit world, not a site haunted by the restless dead, but a place understood to be genuinely, continuously spiritually alive and inhabited. Blackfoot oral tradition offers its own account of the deeper origin of this relationship, one that runs alongside, rather than directly against, the archaeological timeline. Where archaeologists trace human presence on the northern plains to migration following the retreat of the last ice age, Blackfoot origin stories describe the Áísínai'pi as having always been present in this specific homeland, placed here by Napi, the trickster creator figure central to Blackfoot cosmology. Researchers and Blackfoot knowledge holders working together on the UNESCO nomination came to treat these as complementary rather than competing explanations, each addressing a genuinely different kind of question. one concerned with material, datable evidence of occupation recovered from the ground, the other concerned with cultural identity and a people's understood lived relationship to a specific sacred piece of land passed down across countless generations. The valley carries a long list of formal recognitions that reflect just how significant researchers eventually came to understand it to be, each one arriving only after decades of accumulated study and increasingly direct Blackfoot involvement in how the site was presented and protected. It was protected as a provincial park in 1957. Access to sections of the site was restricted starting in 1977, specifically to curb a growing vandalism problem as visitor numbers increased and casual tourists began leaving their own marks alongside carvings thousands of years old. It received Alberta Historic Resource designation in 1981, National Historic Site status in 2004, and finally, in 2019, UNESCO World Heritage Site status, inscribed under the name Writing on Stone, Áísínai'pi, becoming just the 20th Canadian site to ever receive that designation, and the first new site in Alberta in nearly 25 years, a gap that itself reflects just how demanding and lengthy the nomination process genuinely was. The valley's more recent history sits directly alongside its ancient one, layered into the same landscape rather than replacing it. In 1887, the Northwest Mounted Police established an outpost here specifically to shut down the illegal cross-border whiskey trade moving through the region, and a reconstruction of that post still stands on its original site today, a settler-era chapter of the valley's history preserved just a short walk from carvings that predate it by thousands of years, two very different kinds of history sharing the same stretch of riverbank. Modern conservation work continues to reveal new detail even in carvings that have been studied for generations. Using a digital enhancement technique called DS-Tretch, capable of pulling out faint pigment traces invisible to the naked eye, researchers examining one petroglyph of a horse discovered subtle traces of red ochre that had originally been used to color the carved lines. A rare practice in Canadian rock art that had gone completely undetected for who knows how long, hiding in plain sight on a panel people had been walking past for decades. Even now, the site keeps offering up new information to anyone willing to look closely enough, using the right tools, and increasingly in direct partnership with the descendants of the people who actually made it. What Writing on Stone represents, in the end, isn't a mystery in the sense of something unsolvable. It's a landscape that was misread for the better part of a century, treated as an eerie curiosity by outside observers who lacked the cultural context to understand what they were actually looking at, and who filled that gap with the closest available word from their own language and worldview instead. The real explanation didn't require ghosts, and it didn't require abandoning the very real sense that this is a genuinely sacred, significant place, one where something important continues to happen. It required listening directly and patiently to the people who had always understood exactly what was being written here and why. As Martin Heavyhead put it himself, this isn't a fixed document from a vanished past. It's a place where things are still being written, continuously, in the present, and in every meaningful sense, it always has been. If this surprised you, let me know in the comments below, and subscribe for more ancient North American history hiding in plain sight. Watch the next videos.